What drives a man to leave everything behind, to walk into the unknown, risking everything for a story no one believes? Marco Polo was branded a liar and a dreamer, yet he embarked on a 24-year journey from Venice to the court of the great Khan in China, revealing a world Europe had never even imagined. How did this Venetian merchant's son end up in the heart of the Mongol Empire, and why did his incredible tales meet disbelief and scorn? The answers lie in choices that would forever change history, and in consequences that no one could have foreseen. Friends, be sure to subscribe to my Quiet History channel, like it, and leave a comment of at least 7 words. This is necessary for the channel to function. Share this video with others if you think it's important. Thank you. Venice in the mid-13th century was unlike any city in Europe. Imagine a place where canals replaced streets, and gondolas were the lifeblood of commerce. The air thick with salt, fish, spices, and wine. Venice was alive, a gateway to the world, not a closed city. It breathed trade, ambition, and the relentless hunger for profit. This was the world Marco Polo was born into in the year 1254, a city bustling with merchants, sailors, and travelers sharing stories from distant lands. But what kind of boy grows up in such a place, surrounded by whispers of faraway empires and treasures? Marco's family was part of the honorable merchant class, not nobility, but driven by different ambitions. His father, Marco Polo, and Uncle Maffeo ran a trading house that stretched beyond Venice's borders, first to Constantinople and then to Crimea. Their world was one of ledgers and routes, debts and exchanges, where capital was not hoarded, but set in motion. Before Marco was even born, his father and uncle had already embarked on their first perilous journey, sailing from the port of Sudak toward lands Europeans barely understood, toward the court of Kublai Khan himself. Marco's early years were marked by absence. His father was a distant figure, thousands of miles away in a world that Venice considered almost mythical. Raised by his mother and relatives, Marco grew up amid rumors, maps, and the voices of merchants returning from foreign lands. These were not just stories, they were lessons, fragments of a living geography filled with names, scents, and numbers. As a child, Marco was not bookish, but his mind absorbed the world like a sponge. He memorized trade routes, city names, and the value of spices and textiles, building a mental map that no academy could teach. Then, around the age of 15, everything changed. Niccolo and Maffeo reappeared after nearly 15 years, presumed lost or dead. They returned, not as refugees, but triumphant bearers of gold, jewels, Persian carpets, rare spices, and strange garments. Most astonishing of all was a letter from Kublai Khan, the great Mongol ruler, addressed to the Pope. It was a call for Christian scholars, a plea for knowledge exchange that Europe had never seen before. This letter was more than diplomacy. It was an invitation to enter a world beyond imagination, and it would pull Marco into a journey that would test every fiber of his being. Niccolo saw in his son not only his blood, but a mind akin to his own, methodical, persistent, cautious. The bond they formed was not one of nostalgia, but of shared purpose. With his uncle, Niccolo began preparing for the second voyage, one that would take Marco across Persia, Tibet, and Burma, to the very court of the White Khan. But what drove them to risk everything again? What choices must be made to cross deserts and mountains where one misstep meant death? The stakes could not have been higher, and the path far from certain. Marco Polo's story is not a legend. It is the saga of a man who left behind the familiarity of Venice, ventured into the uncharted, and returned to tell a tale so incredible it would be dismissed as fantasy for centuries. Yet his journey reshaped Europe's understanding of the East forever, opening doors to cultures, goods, and knowledge previously locked away by fear and ignorance. What would happen when his words finally reached Europe? Would the world be ready to accept the truth of his journey, or would fear and disbelief silence him? Subscribe to Quiet History to follow the unraveling of stories like Marco Polo's, tales of decisions that change the course of history, and the human fears that shape those choices. Every day, a new chapter in the saga of our world unfolds. Dare to listen. What does it mean to leave everything you know behind? To step into the unknown with nothing but a fragile hope? Marco Polo was about to find out. When the brothers set out to deliver the Pope's long-awaited reply to Kublai Khan, they did not just carry letters. They carried the weight of destiny itself. The death of Pope Clement IV had plunged the Church into uncertainty. A new pope was nowhere to be found, forcing the Polo brothers to delay their mission. And in that crucial moment, they made a fateful decision: to bring young Marco along. The boy did not resist. He carried no fear, only an unspoken hunger for the world beyond Venice. But could he grasp the true cost of the path he was about to walk? The answer loomed like a shadow over every step they would take. Venice, the city of dreams and shadows, did not see this as farewell. It was like the sea releasing its ships, without tears, without curses, without sorrow. Marco Polo knew he was leaving, yet had no idea when or if he would ever return. His mother was likely gone by then, a ghost from a past life. Before departing, he visited the grand cathedral of St. Mark, seeking a silent blessing. Then, in the spring of 1271, 3 figures slipped away from the canals and alleys of Venice, father, uncle, and son, setting sail toward a fate none could predict. Their first challenge awaited across the Adriatic, in Acre, a Christian stronghold surrounded by the turbulent currents of the Holy Land. Acre was the gateway between worlds, a city trembling between Crusader dreams and Eastern realities. Here, among dusty docks where ships gave way to caravans, the Polos paused. They bore not only letters but gifts, glass vessels, fine Western textiles, delicate mechanical trinkets, tokens of European craft meant for the great Khan himself. Yet the letter was no longer from a pope, but from the papal legate, Theobald Visconti, destined to become Pope Gregory X. This document was their shield, proof that their mission was sanctioned by the highest spiritual authority, even as the papal throne remained empty. But with this fragile protection came immense risk. Any misstep could mean death or dishonor. From Acre, their path led through lands once ruled by crusaders, now fractured among Muslim emirates and feuding local lords. They traveled by caravan, a slow-moving web of merchants, pilgrims, and mercenaries, threading through the scorching deserts and treacherous hills of Syria. Nights were spent on bare earth or in fortified inns, always alert to thieves or wild beasts lurking in the dark. The heat was oppressive, the dust relentless. Each mile forward was paid for with exhaustion and peril. And yet, Marco marched on, driven not by duty alone, but by a restless desire to witness what lay beyond his European horizon. Their journey bore them into the northern reaches of Mesopotamia, to Mosul, a bustling crossroads of cultures and goods. Here, local Christians known as the Jacobites welcomed them with unexpected warmth. The bazaars were alive with treasures from distant realms: Indian fabrics, Chinese silk, Turkish copper, Persian carpets. For the first time, Marco saw with his own eyes the wonders his father had only spoken of. Porcelain bowls from the East, silk sashes adorned with mysterious symbols. Each item whispered secrets of lands far beyond Venice's reach. It was in Mosul that the name Kublai Khan first struck his ears, not from his father's lips, but from traders and wandering scholars alike. Kublai Khan was no mere tyrant or thief. He was a ruler who forged order from chaos, a lawgiver who built roads and controlled half the known world. The tales told by these travelers painted him as a man who held vast power with an iron grip, but also a vision for unity and control. An old man even showed Marco a coin, with a square hole in its center, a tangible link to a realm that seemed almost mythical. Every story, every artifact, every whispered name knitted a tapestry of a world both vast and perilous. And Marco's first step onto this winding road was irreversible. The years ahead promised hardship and wonder, but also a series of choices that would shape not only his life, but the course of history itself. The journey of Marco Polo had begun. With each step, the boy became more than a merchant's son. He became a witness to empires, a bearer of secrets, and a man walking into the very heart of an unknown world, where every decision could mean survival or oblivion. And no one could know what awaited beyond the horizon. If you want to uncover more about the fateful choices that shaped history and the remarkable journey of Marco Polo, subscribe to Quiet History. What if the road you chose could change the fate of empires? What if every step deeper into unknown lands tightened the noose of destiny around your neck? Marco Polo claimed to carry a treasure from northern China, a truth as fragile as the empire's fragile hold on remote provinces. Under Kublai Khan, even the farthest regions paid tribute with ruthless precision, and thieves seemed to vanish without a trace. But was this control genuine, or a mask hiding chaos beneath? The path from Balkh stretched southeast, crossing lands we now call northern Afghanistan, a place once called Bactria, layered with history like a wound that refused to heal. Hellenistic ruins stood beside shattered Buddhist monasteries, casualties of endless invasions. Travelers glimpsed broken walls, crumbling domes, and rock-carved tombs, silent witnesses to forgotten kings whose names dissolved into the dust. Yet one truth echoed louder than any forgotten dynasty. This land now belonged to the Mongols. In a remote mountain village, Marco fell ill. Morning weakness turned into a cruel fever by nightfall. Shivers racked his frame, and vomiting left him drained. A sage herbalist from Sogdiana appeared as if summoned by fate, brewing bitter mountain roots into a healing potion. He warned Marco to rest, to hide his head from the sun for 3 days. The illness passed, but a silent pact with vulnerability was sealed. From that moment, Marco valued life itself as a fragile flame, protecting it fiercely against the cold nights and poisoned waters of the trail ahead. Weeks later, the caravan reached Badakhshan, a harsh mountain realm now part of eastern Tajikistan. Known for its rare lapis lazuli, the region's blue stones were prized even in distant China. Locals showed gleaming fragments wrapped in woolen cloth, whispering tales of the finest gems sent via the Karakoram route directly to the Khan's court. But the journey was brutal. Narrow paths crumbled beneath unsettled rocks, thin air choked the travelers at dizzying heights, and rest became a desperate struggle for survival. To reach the remote Pamirs, the caravan had to cross the Wakhan Corridor, a knife's edge between Afghanistan, Tajikistan, China, and Pakistan. Here, the land was ruthless. Camels shivered in the cold that pierced even summer's sun. Horses stumbled over frozen stones. Human skin cracked and bled in the bitter air. A man broke his leg on an icy rock and was abandoned to a village's mercy. From 30, barely 20 remained, a grim toll that whispered of the merciless cost paid for ambition and loyalty alike. Descending from the peaks, the caravan entered vast valleys where nomads grazed their flocks. These were the Mongols' lands, not cities, but yurts and open plains, their power woven into the very earth. Men rode horses like shadows, women wore intricate fur hats, children herded sheep under watchful eyes. A Mongol rider, hearing who they were, led them to the clan's elder, a man charged by the Khan himself to oversee all travelers. This meeting was a crossroads. Inside the tent, amid the flickering shadows of the steppe night, Niccolo presented official documents and a letter from the papal legate. The elder examined the seals with suspicion, questioning the language and origin. After tense deliberations and multiple verifications, the clan granted them a precious token, a wooden tablet bearing Kublai Khan's emblem, a symbol of authority granting them the right to demand horses and provisions at every postal station. The stakes had suddenly risen. From that moment, the road transformed. The caravan no longer trudged alone through hostile lands. They were followed, fed, and guarded. Every 40 or so kilometers, fortified posts awaited, stocked with feed, warm clothes, coal, saddles, and supplies. The great empire's postal system was a marvel of precision and control. Yet behind this order lurked the question: who truly held power here? Was it the Khan, or the unforgiving wilderness that shaped every decision, every irreparable step forward? What drives a man to cross endless deserts and icy mountains? How far will Marco Polo go to grasp an empire ruled not by force, but by law? He was not overwhelmed by the vastness before him, but by the meticulous order that held it together. With pen in hand, Marco captured every detail, realizing this was no random chaos. It was the orchestrated power of a great empire. Yet, the deeper he traveled, the heavier the weight of the choices behind his footsteps. They marched alongside the spine of the world, the Great Silk Road, though its name was unknown to them. Caravans flowed both ways, silver and wine from the west, silk, paper, medicines, rare herbs, and jade from the east. Each encounter whispered of distant powers and ancient wealth, but also of invisible rules and unseen eyes watching their every move. Marco felt himself slipping from a mere traveler into a living symbol of far-off Venice, a world only faintly known here. His voice grew cautious, his tales measured. What if his words sealed their fate in this alien land? Between the soaring Karakoram mountains and rivers descending from China, the road split. One path wandered south toward Kashgar and the Himalayas, long, perilous. The other veered east through the Altai, straight to the imperial capital. Polo chose the eastern path, shorter yet fraught with danger, where cold crept in like a silent threat and the trees thinned to barren stones. They no longer traveled as outsiders, but as emissaries of the Khan himself. But what price would their allegiance demand? When the last hill gave way to the vast plain, dotted with camps and the first northern Chinese fortifications, Marco understood. Behind him lay not only Persia, but the entire world he had known. He had crossed deserts, mountains, glaciers, lands erased from memory, where shattered temples stood beside smoking fires. Fear, sickness, cold, and solitude gnawed at the caravan. The border of China remained undefined, but something immense loomed ahead, something larger than any single nation. The road was no longer just a crossing, it was a point of no return. As Marco Polo, his father, and uncle neared the great Khan's court, the journey changed its nature. No longer harsh and unbroken, the road transformed into a grand thoroughfare lined with grain caravans, fabrics, porcelain, and salt. Officials, messengers, and guarded convoys passed in both directions. This was the heart of a realm firmly under Mongol authority, a world ruled by regulations and hierarchy. Had Marco stepped into a new age, or a new cage? Their destination was Shandu, a summer residence of Kublai Khan, a refuge from the stifling heat of Khan Balik. At the city gates, guards halted the caravan. A translator presented the golden paisa, the Khan's official tablet earned far west on the journey. Documents scrutinized, permission granted, and a protective escort joined them. The roads here were paved with pride. Stone lions guarded the bends. In the city, warehouses, stables, kitchens, and offices thrived under painted eaves of red, blue, and green. Silence ruled, not from fear, but tradition. Every step forward was a dance with fate. The Polo family was housed in a guest residence for foreigners, given servants, a translator, guards, and a strict code of conduct. Approaching the Khan's chambers without invitation was forbidden, as was unsupervised contact with officials. Every moment was bound by a rigid hierarchy. Marco's father and uncle negotiated with ministers, delivering gifts. The language of the court was strange, neither Chinese nor Turkic. In nearby villages, stilt houses rose above the ground, and herbs hung under roofs to repel snakes. Danger was close, yet invisible. When a court official fell ill, the burden fell to Marco, now the sole representative of central authority, to negotiate with local elders. He recorded place names, observed rituals led by women garbed in robes embroidered with birds and frogs. Though their words were lost on him, Marco sensed an ancient power weaving through these ceremonies. What unseen forces ruled this land, and what would their presence mean for the fate he had chosen? Marco Polo's path was no mere journey. It was the crossing of thresholds, the acceptance of irreversible choices. Each step deeper into the empire's heart pulled him further from the world he knew and into a destiny shaped by fear, power, and the fragile order of an immense, unknowable realm. The road ahead promised wonders and dangers beyond reckoning. Would he survive the price of knowledge or become lost to history itself? If these tales of Marco Polo's perilous passage into the heart of the Mongol Empire intrigue you, join Quiet History and uncover the hidden stories behind history's greatest crossroads. What drives a man deep into unknown lands where every step might be his last? Marco Polo's mission took him to Yunnan, a vast mountainous province in the southwest of the empire. This was a land barely under Mongol control, still ruled by local princes who only paid lip service to the Khan. But what he found there was more than just politics. It was the raw, desperate pursuit of fortune. He witnessed men knee-deep in icy mountain rivers, sifting through sand with woven baskets, hoping to catch even a single golden grain. Each flick of the wrist was a gamble against fate, the fragile glimmer of treasure, a distant dream. The air was thick with silent tension. Every minute could mean success or loss. In remote villages, homes were linked by hanging bridges made from tree roots, swaying perilously over abysses so deep they defied the eye. Marco described one as a trap door crossing an immeasurable void. Crossing it was a step into the unknown, a fragile thread between life and death. There he met a monk carrying a tiny bird with a broken wing wrapped in his sleeve. The man said he had found it injured years before and never let it free. Marco never asked why. That fragile creature became a symbol, a silent witness to a world beyond scrolls and imperial edicts, a world ruled by unseen, unspoken laws. Kublai Khan then sent Marco further south, to the borderlands with Burma. This was no diplomatic envoy, but covert reconnaissance, a tense mission to assess a growing threat. The Burmese kingdom was strengthening, and the Khan's court demanded answers from the empire's farthest edges. The journey was brutal. Tropical storms lashed their path, suffocating humidity clung to every breath, and illness spread quietly through the caravan. One man was swept away by a deadly mudslide. Marco had to personally negotiate with guides, fighting exhaustion and fear just to keep on course. When they finally reached the capital, the welcome was cold and formal. They were barred from entering the central palace. Instead, gifts were handed over: rich fabrics, exotic fruits, pungent spices. Marco stood in awe of temples crowned with gilded roofs and giant statues of lions and elephants guarding the gates. The air pulsed with music, a relentless choral rhythm that seemed to never cease, even beneath the night's shadows. Through a translator, a senior priest told Marco, "Here everyone hears the Khan's footsteps, but no one has yet opened the door." The threat hung in the air like a silent storm waiting to break. Another route led Marco into Tibet, a grim test of endurance rather than diplomacy. His task was to observe how the empire's influence spread across the brutal, inaccessible mountain ranges. Each step was a battle: frozen passes, biting cold, and scarce fuel for their fires. Nights were merciless. Even the tea froze in their kettles. Once, their entire caravan went nearly a full day without food because the horses failed to climb a snow-choked slope. One companion succumbed to the harsh conditions and was buried among the stones. There was no alternative. In a monastery, Marco was allowed into the scriptorium, where scribes dressed in dark robes wrote silently, dipping brushes into ink with deliberate calm. He noticed how they balanced their brushes on pinky fingers, barely touching the paper, as if every stroke was a prayer. Their language was foreign, their silence louder than words. He returned from Tibet not with reports of conquest, but with a humbled observation. Here lived people who looked skyward, not to thrones. They could not be defeated, only listened to. The empire had met a force that resisted its very nature. Some of Marco's travels held no orders, only the restless pull of a restless world. He accompanied tax collectors, salt caravans, even bridge builders. He ventured where men wore long turbans and women bore rings in their noses, refusing to remove them even in sleep. He documented tribes that preserved ancestral heads in clay vaults and taught children from an early age not the names of kings, but the names of birds and geese. The landscapes were alien, their customs baffling, but Marco always wrote it all down. His stories later seemed unbelievable. Men sleeping in hammocks suspended high in trees to escape venomous snakes. Villages where men abstained from participating in. The list of mysteries and wonders stretched endlessly, a testament to the vastness and unpredictability of the empire's fringes. Through every step, every decision, every encounter, Marco Polo was drawn deeper into a world of irreversible choices, a world where empires stretched their grasp, but met the unyielding spirit of the unknown. What fate awaited those who dared to cross these borders? The answer hung in the balance, just beyond the horizon. Subscribe to Quiet History for more journeys into the shadows of the past. What happens when the world refuses to believe what you see? Marco Polo navigated lands where smooth stones with holes were worshipped, believed to carry the voices of ancestors. Women ruled markets, and entire cities thrived without walls. These were not tales spun for wonder. Marco recorded every detail with ruthless precision, no matter how bizarre or unexplained. Yet he knew the day would come when his truths would be met with outright disbelief. Still, he carried on, chronicling a world slipping into the shadows of forgotten memory. But what cost does such unwavering honesty demand? When Marco Polo first arrived in Hangzhou, the city struck him with an overwhelming wealth and order unlike anything he had ever witnessed. This was no ruined outpost of the Mongol conquest. It was the former capital of the Song dynasty, still vibrant, a hub of trade and culture pulsing with life. Can you imagine a city without destruction, where canals and gardens intertwine, and daily life hums with quiet efficiency? Yet beneath this calm, the ground was shifting, unseen. How long before even this jewel would fracture? Every morning, Marco watched boats glide across the western lake, laden with rice, spices, and textiles. Oarsmen soaked their paddles in warm water to prevent cracking. Women brewed tea by the docks. Officials stamped wooden slips like receipts, maintaining precise order in commerce. Inside the home of a respected merchant, Marco discovered a library housing hundreds of wooden printed books. a treasure trove of knowledge carved in mirrored script. It was here that he first saw paper money, backed by the empire itself, a currency so trusted that forgery meant death. What would happen when such innovations collided with European disbelief? Marco lingered weeks in Hangzhou, exploring its bustling port where silk bales, porcelain chests, dried ginger, and bark were loaded onto ships bound for southern provinces and distant archipelagos. The markets brimmed with spices, paper, lamps, tools, and even freshly prepared dishes wrapped in palm leaves. Life moved calmly but swiftly, no rush, no hesitation. Yet beneath this ordered rhythm, a storm was gathering. The old guard at Kublai Khan's court was fading, replaced by wary young officials from the north, eyes sharp with suspicion. Could the empire's heart endure such quiet unraveling? Marco's role was no longer just that of a traveler or trader. He had become a vessel of memory, a keeper of images from worlds uninterpretable to his own people. His reports, diplomatic letters, and informal negotiations unfolded under unpredictable skies, shifting winds, and mounting instability. At the imperial court, Kublai Khan's strength waned with age, his presence rare. Decisions stalled, alliances shifted silently. Friends of the Polo family vanished like shadows. The hospitality that once welcomed Marco cooled into cold, brief encounters. What is the fate of a man whose respect outlasts interest? And what does it mean for the fragile ties between East and West? As Marco prepared to depart, the atmosphere had turned palpably different. The empire's pulse slowed. Its vibrant markets and bustling streets seemed caught in a fragile moment before collapse. The journey along the coast would be slow, uncertain, a mirror of the shifting winds of power and trust. Each step forward was a step into the unknown, where every decision would reverberate far beyond the moment. What irreversible consequences awaited the man who dared to document the last gleams of a world slipping away? Marco Polo's chronicles stand not merely as travel tales, but as testimonies to a world on the brink. A world ruled by choices made in shadows, by fears unspoken, and by irreversible turns that shaped history. His words challenge us to wonder, who will believe the stories of the forgotten? Who will carry these fragile memories forward? And as we peer into the past, are we not forced to confront the fragile nature of trust, respect, and the human cost of change? If you want to understand the fragile threads that held the medieval world together, and how they unraveled, follow quiet history. The past still speaks, but only to those willing to listen. What happens when trusted leaders die far from home, shrouded in silence and mystery? In the sweltering heat of the southern seas, the fleet moved sluggishly, battered by relentless rain and punishing tides. Men grew weak. Fever, headaches, and sleepless nights claimed the strong. One morning, a respected ship elder was found lifeless, clutching letters that hinted at secrets better left unread. Marco, the commander, ordered a solemn burial at sea, a ritual cloaked in ancient prayers and the Khan's embroidered symbol. The fleet's voyage was already shadowed by death, but darker trials lurked ahead. Why would local officials standing between Marco and the power he sought, respond with cold indifference. At the coast of Champa, Marco confronted bureaucrats whose politeness masked apathy. Days passed as he sought an audience with the governor, not for himself, but for the princess traveling aboard their ships. "Power here is measured in strength, not names," whispered the escorting officer. 3 tense days of waiting revealed the harsh truth. Titles meant nothing without proof of force. The fleet's mission was tethered to fragile respect, easily broken by a lack of urgency. How long can a fleet linger in foreign ports, risking exposure to storms and decay? At one anchorage near the Malacca Peninsula, the skies unleashed fury. Ships were damaged, sails torn, cargo shifted precariously. Marco made his way ashore, engaging with local merchants, probing for news of distant lands and monsoon seasons. Their warnings were unanimous. Sailing now meant courting disaster. Yet the fleet could not afford to wait. Time was slipping through their fingers like grains of sand, and every moment spent was a gamble against the sea's wrath. When the storms finally eased, the fleet steered southwest, chasing uncertain horizons toward India's western shores. But the ocean's cruelty did not relent. Ships scattered in a night tempest, lost to each other in the abyss. A week later, they regrouped off the coast of what is now Kerala. Here, Marco witnessed ports alive with trade: pepper, jewels, sandalwood, commodities that whispered of wealth and power. He recorded a cryptic observation: merchants are like books, and judges like salt collectors. In this intricate web of commerce and law, alliances would be made or broken. In Kulik, Marco met with local officials who unveiled stores of spices, fabrics, and pearls, a treasure trove guarded with vigilance. Among them was a Persian translator tied to the local factory, a key to unlocking secrets beyond the docks. Through him, Marco learned of shifts in Persia's throne. Argun, the original ruler for whom Kokochin was intended, had died. But his son, Ghazan Khan, was poised to accept the princess, binding new threads in the dynastic fabric. The mission endured, though its target had shifted beneath their feet, raising the stakes and the urgency. What does it mean when those once honored no longer hold influence? As the fleet rested, Marco's thoughts darkened. The court that had once welcomed them had turned cold. Respect remained, but power waned. They were neither exiled nor embraced. Reports sent to the Khan vanished into silence. They petitioned for leave through every channel: officials, old friends, letters, but no reply came. One cryptic message arrived: the Khan is silent, but the path is open. A grim invitation to depart without farewell, a sign that their role at court had ended. Could they complete their mission and still survive the journey home? When the mission with Kokochin resumed, the realization struck: this was their moment. Deliver the princess, fulfill the task, and withdraw while the Khan neither forbade nor stopped them. The pause was a razor's edge. Their ship left the Indian port light in cargo, but heavy with dread. They abandoned not just an empire, but nearly 2 decades of life and hope. No celebrations marked their departure, only the endless sea, harsh winds, exhaustion, and a desperate yearning for home. As vessels carrying Princess Kokochin slipped away from the southern Yuan territories, none foresaw the trials that awaited. The Polo family, Marco, his father, and uncle, had already accepted that their days at the billet court were numbered. Their influence eroded, their presence waning. The decisions they made, the paths they took, set them on a course where there was no turning back. The great sun, once shining upon them, had simply ceased to illuminate their world. Their fate was sealed in the silence between the waves. What happens when duty collides with desperation? When a mission to escort a princess turns into a perilous bid for survival? Marco's fleet, 14 ships strong, set sail toward the Persian Gulf, carrying more than just cargo. They carried a fragile hope. But no voyage begins without its shadows. On the very first days at sea, disaster struck. One vessel ran aground near the coast, its hull breached, forcing a frantic transfer of goods to nearby ships. Desperation led men to swim for safety, many never reaching shore. The journey was already blood-stained and precarious, and it had only just begun. Chaos unfolded again when the fleet reached the Malabar coast. The death of the chief official responsible for planning the route sent shockwaves through the crew and servants alike. Panic spread like wildfire. Without clear leadership, the expedition stalled indefinitely in port. Spoiling supplies and relentless tropical heat accelerated decay. Rats infested the holds, and the dwindling water became a prize fought over with desperate claws. Time was slipping away, dragging the entire mission into a suffocating standstill. Then came the invisible enemy, disease. What began as a handful of sick men aboard the ships crossing the Bay of Bengal mutated rapidly into a full-blown epidemic. Fever scorched their bodies, vomiting and weakness drained their spirits. Isolation offered little protection as infection infiltrated every vessel. Marco, without medical training, became a reluctant healer. He burned infected clothing and enforced strict hygiene, remembering ancient wisdom. Keep the air dry, prevent stagnation, ventilate the holds. Yet with every passing day, the weight of death grew heavier, suffusing the very ropes, planks, and garments with the scent of mortality. Exhausted and broken, the fleet sought refuge on Sumatra's wild shores. Dense forests and rugged terrain greeted them, a sanctuary laced with new dangers. The locals were wary, their hospitality uncertain. Weak from fever and famine, the men struggled to repair their ships and barter for food and water. Death continued to stalk the camp, claiming souls even on land, forcing silent burials beneath tangled roots. Discipline became their only salvation. Marco imposed strict routines, boiling water, scheduled rations, constant watches. But outside, a storm was gathering. As the fleet returned to the sea, a violent monsoon seized them. Waves slammed against the wooden sides, groaning with the strain of relentless fury. One ship vanished beneath the clouds and waves, another lost its mast to the tempest's wrath. On board a third, tensions erupted in a bitter clash between officers over dwindling supplies. Marco had to step in, not with threats, but with the authority earned through hardship. One more fracture, one more breakdown, and everything would shatter beyond repair. The fragile thread holding them together was stretched to its breaking point. Amid this chaos, Marco began to speak aloud the memories he had guarded for years, words that would become more than mere stories. Little did they know, these spoken fragments would lay the foundation of the most famous book on travel for centuries to come. At that moment, in the dim confines of a Genoese prison, Marco dictated his tales to Rustichello. The scribe's polished prose, shaped like a knightly romance, concealed raw, lived experience beneath its layers. No maps nor journals accompanied Marco, only vivid recollections, each detail a fragile lifeline to a world slipping away. Rustichello wrote in the dialect of Provençal, the language of merchants and scholars, weaving drama and smoothing rough edges. What began as a desperate act to preserve fading memories would outlive empires, inspiring generations who never knew the names or faces behind the words. The story was no mere adventure. It was the record of choices that could never be undone, of fear and endurance on the edge of the unknown. Marco Polo's journey was forever etched into history by the fragile strength of memory and the relentless spirit to survive. What would become of this tale? How would these recollections shape the world's understanding of distant lands? Though born in prison shadows, this manuscript would ignite imaginations and chart new horizons. The decisions made in moments of despair, the battles fought against nature and within themselves, were not just stories. They were lessons etched in blood and fire. The voyage was a crucible of human will, a testament to the irreversible paths carved by one man's courage and the relentless tides of fate. If you want to uncover more stories where history's most fateful decisions collide with human fear and resilience, subscribe to Quiet History. The past is never silent. It echoes in every choice we make. What if everything you believed about a legendary traveler was half-truth or elaborate fiction? How do we separate fact from fantasy when history is rewritten by countless voices? Marco Polo's story is not just about exploration. It's a tangled web of decisions, fears, and irreversible consequences that shaped centuries. Marco Polo returned to Venice after years of captivity, carrying with him far more than just memories, a manuscript that would ignite a fire across Europe. But this text, his Chronicle of Asia, was no static relic. As it was copied and recopied, each version mutated, more numbers here, more wonders there. Some scribes trimmed his words, others embellished. Soon a tangled forest of manuscripts emerged, where no one could tell Marco's voice from the additions of copyists and commentators. This was the beginning of a story that would spiral beyond his control. They called it the Million, or the Book of Marvels, a name as grand as the tales it contained. In monasteries of Tuscany, in the bustling markets of France, and the universities of Padua, readers devoured it. Merchants thirsted to know if paper money truly existed in China, while cartographers hunted for landmarks, rivers, mountains, distances that could redraw the map of the known world. But beneath the excitement lurked doubt and suspicion. Could Marco Polo have really walked the streets of Cathay? Or was he merely the mouthpiece for stories told by others? Skeptics pointed to glaring omissions. No mention of the great Chinese ant. No detailed descriptions of Chinese script. No precise transcription of Chinese names. Historians have debated this for centuries, locked in a duel between belief and disbelief. Yet the careful reader uncovers a hidden truth, details impossible to fabricate. The intricate workings of the Mongol postal system, the tax structure under the Yuan dynasty, the protocols of imperial courts from Tibet to Manchuria. Marco's account contained truths only an eyewitness could know. Marco was no scholar of science or language, but he spoke a different tongue, the language of the observer. His words weren't mere wonders. They were fragments of reality, filtered through a traveler's eyes. Even the bizarre tales of people with tails, giants' islands, or mountains filled with serpent-sized snakes were framed with caution. I was told. I heard. They say. This distinction mattered profoundly in a medieval world that wrapped the exotic in magic and myth. This book did more than fascinate. It sparked a blaze of curiosity about the East that would set the course for generations. It inspired merchants, pilgrims, and adventurers alike. Over a century later, Christopher Columbus would pore over its pages, making notes in the margins, driven by the hope of connecting with distant, wealthy civilizations. The million fed the belief in a vast, rich earth waiting to be explored, a belief that altered history's trajectory forever. Despite the fame the book earned, Marco Polo himself remained a shadowy figure. He avoided public celebrations, declined to give speeches, and stayed silent on the controversies swirling around his tales. To contemporaries, he was enigmatic, neither confirming nor denying the accusations of fabrication. Even in his final years, as his manuscript was copied endlessly throughout Italy, and his name echoed in remote monasteries, Marco lived quietly, detached from the storms his story had unleashed. His life after captivity knew no more upheavals. He settled back into his Venetian home, the same house reclaimed from chaos and storm years earlier. There he lived silently, almost withdrawn, a man who seemed to have witnessed and endured everything. No longer chasing fame or new adventures, he had told what he deemed essential. The rest was past or passed on. His family life unfolded quietly, far from the spotlight that his book had cast. When asked on his deathbed if he had exaggerated any of his tales, his reputed final words were chilling in their humility. I have not told half of what I saw. This utterance sealed a legacy of mystery, a haunting reminder that some stories are too vast, too dangerous to fully grasp. Marco Polo's manuscript was more than a travelogue. It was a catalyst for exploration, a spark lighting the fires of discovery and ambition. It forced a world on the brink of expansion to look beyond its borders. The echoes of his choices, the consequences of his silence and storytelling, would ripple through history, shaping destinies and fueling dreams that changed the world forever. If you've been captivated by the tangled, tense journey of Marco Polo, subscribe to Quiet History for more stories where human decisions collide with fate, fear, and the unknown. What does it truly mean to be remembered? How does a man measured not by wealth, but by memory, carve his place in history? Marco, once a traveler of vast deserts, towering mountains, and endless steppes, found himself confined in a different kind of battle, one against his own fading strength. His body, once resilient and unyielding, now betrayed him in the damp, shadowed streets of Venice, where every breath brought the ache of cold winds and lingering sickness. The once indomitable explorer was at the mercy of time, a silent battle playing out within a fragile frame. Yet, even as his health waned, his mind remained a beacon, drawing those hungry for knowledge into his quiet home. But what secrets did he guard? And how would his final choices echo through the ages? In the shadows of his dimmed vitality stood Donata Bad-Deer, a woman shaped by the merciless calculations of Venetian society. Daughter of a noble lineage, she moved within circles where every move was measured, every word weighed. Their marriage, unlikely in its quiet contentment, was a dance of patience and unspoken understanding. Marco, weary from the world, mastered the art of endurance. Donata, raised among merchants, knew the priceless value of silence in a home. Together, they forged a fragile peace, protecting their daughters and managing their modest estate with careful hands. But beneath the surface of domestic life, the world beyond still whispered tales of a man who had faced a great Khan's court. How long could this delicate balance hold against the creeping shadow of illness and the burden of memory? Venice, with its damp air and stale corners, was a prison for a body once made for endless journeys. Marco's joints throbbed relentlessly, and a cough haunted his nights and days alike, a cruel reminder that even the strongest could break. Yet he remained a man of substance, not for gold or land, but for the stories etched into his soul. Young sailors and scribes, sons of merchants, all sought him out, not for riches, but for a glimpse into the vast, mysterious world he had walked. They craved a single name, a fragment of a route, a detail snatched from the whispers of a time long gone. And Marco, despite his failing health, gave them these fragments, each a thread in the vast tapestry of his legacy. But as his breath grew shallower, a fateful decision loomed, a choice that would define how history remembered him. When the relentless grip of illness tightened and the end seemed near, Marco summoned a notary. With a voice weighed by years and weariness, he began to dictate his last will. He spoke of his wife, his daughters, the loyal servants who had shared his final years, and the sacred temples that would receive his charitable gifts. Yet the heart of his legacy was not in possessions or donations. It was a book, an unvarnished chronicle born from captivity, a testament crafted in the crucible of suffering. Remarkably, he chose not to revise it, not to soften or trim its truths, and refused to speak of its contents. This silent defiance raised questions. What truths were too potent to be framed by words? What dangers lay within those pages? The final chapter of Marco's life approached, steeped in quiet resolve and mystery. In the chill of January 1924, Marco passed away. His funeral followed the modest customs of Venice, no grand statues, no fanfare, only a simple coffin carried through the familiar streets. Few recognized the man beneath the cloth, and even fewer grasped the weight of his absence. His grave bore only his name, a stark marker for a man whose true monument was memory itself. His legacy was not carved in stone, but etched into the minds of those who would later grasp its significance. Time would pass, and Europe would finally awaken to the vastness of his journey and the depth of his story. Yet the road to understanding was long, paved with edits, translations, and reconstructions that both preserved and reshaped his voice. His book became a living artifact, copied and reinterpreted, maps drawn, treatises written, legends born from its pages. To some, it was a guide. To others, a warning about the irresistible pull of the road and the irreversible choices made in pursuit of distant horizons. Marco's journey was no longer his alone. It had woven itself into the fabric of cultures, inspiring and cautioning alike. When the Great Silk Road emerged as a symbol linking East and West, it carried echoes of the man who had walked its lengths, a testament to the power of memory over mere wealth. But how many truly understood the price he paid for this legacy? How many recognized the fear and sacrifice hidden behind each name and route he told? Marco's story is a chain of fateful decisions, each choice rippling through time, shaping not only his fate, but the course of continents. His life, marriage, illness, and final testament reveal a man wrestling with the inevitable, the decay of body, the preservation of memory, and the hope that his voice might transcend death itself. In the end, his greatest treasure was not what he owned, but what he gave the world, a glimpse into the unknown and a mirror reflecting the human cost of exploration. His legacy beckons us still, urging us to listen, to remember, and to understand that some journeys never truly end. Subscribe to Quiet History to uncover more stories where the past shadows reveal the irreversible choices that shaped our world.